morning again to everyone. My name's Glenn Jackson. I'm from LTU as well. I'm one of Mike's minions, and my involvement with learning analytics in particular goes back only a very short time, but it's been a very intense period because Mike asked me to sort of design and implement our analytics pilot for this that's running this semester, involving about 22 people. And there are plenty of things I have to say about that, but that's not what I wanted to do with this session. I didn't want to just make it another sort of me saying what we're doing here with analytics at the moment. I wanted to invite these people along to actually give a sort of a cross-section of opinions about learning analytics from across the university and from a range of, like Tim said, practical perspectives and theoretical perspectives. So it's hopefully turning some data into, real information and things that can actually help students. And I wanted to put the lens on it of helping teachers to help students because that's probably where I've noticed the most impact can be made. Only the teacher knows the context in which the course is being taught, and therefore only they can really reach out to the students or recommend someone else reach out to the students to make a difference. So that's kind of the main focus, but we'll get a broad range of perspectives. And please, as we go through, think of questions. I've asked each of the speakers to keep it short so that we've got plenty of time for questions and a real discussion at the end, because I think this is one of those areas that we need to talk it out, because if we don't discuss and understand, if someone just presents at you, you go away with so many questions that are unanswered and so many concerns. So I think it's really important that we keep talking about it. Okay, I'll hand over to Glenn without any further ado.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Glenn. And yes, I didn't pay Tim for his question, but it's actually a very, very good statement, because student advancement has a big link in terms of the student experience. So we are a lot to do with student supports, and we work closely in terms of how we best prepare students for study. And over the last 2 or 3 years, we've tried to use analytics to focus our approach. So I've got to be very quick, and there's even a red sign with 1 minute on it, so I'm going to be very quick. I'm going to talk about 2 things, and really I want to talk about what came out of them rather than the mechanics of them. So I'll try to be as quickly as I can through that and then talk what came out of them. One that we did a couple of years ago, which has informed a lot of our interventions, and one that we're working on at the moment around student satisfaction. So if I put up that definition of analytics, I can leave it there. This is a really pretty new area. The key thing for me is it's using data, evidence-based interventions. So everything we're trying to do is guided by data we can gather from any source, and then we evaluate to see what impact we have over time. And I think that's the beauty of this approach. We've used a whole range of approaches. So there's the predictive modelling, data mining. I'll talk about that in a moment. But also, and Glenn's project, it's always odd calling someone else Glenn, but Glenn's project working at the Blackboard data, I think, is a really crucial one for us, because the bit we've done on Blackboard, that's getting people in real time what's happening, and to get ideas of who are the students who are struggling or how we might change our courses. That's very important. And also student self-report data. And the second bit I'll talk about is the student experience survey, which is actually, I think, underutilised. I'll talk a little bit about what we're trying to do. Okay, so I won't go through this program, but just that we did a data mining exercise. So data mining allows you to look at a vast number of variables, characteristics of students, behaviours of students. And in this one we did back in 2013-14 data, so we did it in 2015. What we were looking at was a number of characteristics of students as they enrolled. We're focusing on first years, plus we looked at their Blackboard behaviour. Now, Blackboard on campus is different, say, to an online program, because students interact in different ways with it, but we looked at the initial engagement, weekly interactions, when they downloaded, every variable that we could get. Out of that data mining, what we came up with was a batch of things that seemed important in terms of students dropping out in their first year. This is the commencing students, and I've got one for continuing students. Issues change over time. Some stay stable, some change. The key things we found was that in the first semester is when we lose most of our students. We sort of knew this, but the first semester is the highest dropout time. Up until about week 4 of first semester of the first year is a crucial time, and even the 3 weeks before that in orientation. Then, if students come in with exemptions or overload, they're at risk. So these top ones are the ones that make them more likely to drop out. What we're predicting was that. People, migrant communities, domestic migrant communities with non-English speaking backgrounds is important. A number of other variables that we've looked at and been well established in the area, mature age, coming through the vocational education sector. One thing, when I presented this to the business faculty, they were rather upset because I then say that if you were studying management or IT, you were likely to drop out. The head of department very quickly asked me a few questions about that. But wait for the second slide. It comes better after first year. But certainly those students were at risk in the first year. And then Blackboard, and it was very much failing to engage with Blackboard. Just not turning it on was really crucial. The ones that decreased likelihood, better academic accomplishment, international students who were actually better prepared for study, joint degrees, art students actually stayed better in the first year, which is nice to hear. Continuing students, I'll do this very quickly because it was very much about academic performance. Once someone starts to fail a subject, not at risk where they've failed 50%, but any subject, they are at risk of us losing them over time. So when we get beyond first year, it's very much how you're going academically, the same sort of factors as earlier, and again, failing to engage with Blackboard. The good point is that if you get through first year, management and IT, you're more likely to pass. So if you survive getting over Mount Everest, you can do the rest of the mountains after that. Right? So that was actually quite important for us and the implications. Now, because I'm going to be quick, this is just a diagram of showing how we did that statistically. The one point I want to show you is that we predicted about 0.9, which is really good, who was likely to leave the university based on earlier data. But the real increase is in those first couple of weeks, and this is the Blackboard effect. What I mean is they haven't engaged with our learning management system. After about week 2, none of the other Blackboard factors really matter. It's getting them engaged. So what do we take from that? Well, we put more effort. We were going to do it anyway in orientation transition, but now we have an orientation unit in Blackboard. So from when you've got an offer, you're on a Blackboard site, and we get you playing around on Blackboard. We came with a Blackboard login campaign, and that's a Swinburne Connect program that Vivian and Kim might come back to. We reviewed first year assessment and management IT. So that was some feedback to teachers. And then we started looking at our migrant students. These are domestic migrants with non-English speaking backgrounds who are hidden in the system. Okay, now my second one I'm going to talk about is one that we're just doing now. And this is looking at the student experience survey data. We have several thousand responses on the student survey, experience survey, vast number of items in that survey over the last few years. Universities tend to look at it in terms of how are we going over time. Are we getting more agreement with satisfaction over the last 5 years or declining? Or how are we going comparing to a benchmark group? You know, the ATN versus Swinburne. Did we get a higher percentage or not? Those are legitimate uses of the data, but what we perhaps haven't done enough, and I can't find much on, is trying to look what predicts satisfaction from these measures. How can we use that 12,000 cases of data from students to get some ideas about what we might do to improve their experience? So we did structural equation modelling. What structural equation modelling does is to get rid of dud items. So it allows you to really focus in and get rid of cross-loading items. So you can say, I've got an item, or I've got a collection of items that measures this construct fairly consistently. Then we can look at validity. So the variables that we've pulled out are skills development, and I've put employability there because they're actually very much what employers are looking for. And it's confident with unfamiliar problems, developing ability to plan work, course sharpened analytic skills, problem solving and communication. Okay? That's those skills. Your course expectations, and basically that's 3 ways of saying you knew what to expect when you came into the program. We really made that clear to you. Thirdly, your transition experience, both in terms of enrolment but also orientation. Then student interaction, the chance to work with other students, different students to you, those sorts of factors. These ones hold up as a really significant, clear factor. And then teaching quality, which really breaks into engaging the students well. Challenging them intellectually is another one. Setting challenging assessments is here. Giving constructive feedback. But it's really about being approachable, intellectually stimulating, concerned about the students. Those 6 items hold together as a very clear factor. The last one, and I told you this is hot off the press, so I didn't have time last night to draw this into nice diagrams for you, so I had to translate it from the statistical copy. I'll just walk you through it in the 1 minute I have left. There's a couple of other single item measures in the SES. One is, this is your satisfaction with your course. Are you satisfied with the academic program? The other one is the quality of your educational experience, trying to get at what was it like to be at Swinburne. And the third one is a sense of belonging. They're single item measures and they may not capture exactly what we want, but they do behave differently. We went back to those variables we created, and what we get is we sort of confirm that teaching quality, skill development, both are strong predictors of both of those factors, but it's the skill development, if you look at the bigger number, 0.4, really is the strongest prediction of your satisfaction with your course. When it comes to teaching quality, again, it's skill development, but when it comes to your student experience, it's teaching quality that actually is the stronger predictor. Both of them belonging to the university contributes. So those 3 factors make sense, but really skill development for course satisfaction, satisfaction with the experience is more teaching quality. And the other couple of points that I can make is course expectations really strongly predict skill development. So if students come in thinking, I know what I'm going to get from my course, that actually leads them to be more satisfied with the skills that they got from their course. And that's 0.48, which is huge. Then the transition area and the student interaction, they're unique predictors of this belonging idea. So how well you go engaging with other students, how you go with student interaction, interacting with others, contributes to belonging. So we've got a batch of areas we can contribute to. My last slide is just to make a couple of those points, so they're just there so to stick with you. What we're using this one about is, yes, it does seem that we can isolate, and we've only got 20 items now, not the whole questionnaire, we can isolate some measures around teaching quality, skill development, sense of belonging, and that they do seem to hold up in terms of predicting these 2 types of satisfaction. The transferable attributes, which is very much for professional skill development, is really important in terms of what goes into our courses. So we need to reflect more on that in our teaching. And one thing we can really raise satisfaction with is to be much clearer on course expectations, make sure the students know what they're getting, because that is a major predictor of that. And finally, that there's independent factors to do with the sense of belonging. My next step is really to get some better measures of belonging, satisfaction, and student experience measures, because there are only one item ones that make sense to students. So we can actually be more precise. But this is one way of us getting some approaches to teaching from the data. And I should stop. So thank you.
Thanks for that, Glenn. There's a lot to take in from what you've just provided to us. I'm here just to give a bit of an overview on the Swinburne Connect campaigns that we run throughout our higher ed programs and more recently our VE programs. Much of the data mining I think that Glenn has touched on, we use in Swinburne Connect. It is an engagement service with our students. It's part of engaging with a view to retaining. It's in its 5th year of operation. It's aimed at our commencing first year students and more so our first semester. We focus on that first semester that Glenn touched on. We engage with students, talk to them about their issues and concerns, and we refer students to appropriate university support services. The data actually helps us to identify students who could be most at risk and prioritise them for contact. Okay. What I want to focus on more so are two behavioural campaigns that I think Glenn touched on as well. We have our regular campaign where we communicate and contact all our commencing students, but we focus on two campaigns throughout each semester. The Blackboard logging campaign, which Glenn touched on the importance of within the first 4 weeks of semester. We identify those students who have not logged in each of those 4 weeks, and we prioritise them for contact. They receive an email as well as being followed up by a phone call. So it's phone contact, proactive phone contact to see how they're settling into the semester, and to try and ascertain if they're having any issues and why they're not logging into Blackboard, and to reinforce, I guess, the importance of logging in. And we do that between weeks 1 and 4. The second of our behavioural campaigns is around assessments and assignments, and that's one we've been doing between weeks 3 and 9 for each of the semesters this year. So on a weekly basis, we identify with the assistance of our unit conveners those students that perhaps have not handed in an assessment piece or failed an assessment piece or didn't attain the grade, a high enough grade for that assessment piece. Those students are also followed up with proactive communication. We call the student to have a chat about how they think they went in those assessments, but also to try and encourage the student to give us as much information and to provide them with the support services that we have been provided with by the unit conveners. I guess in keeping with the analytics and how the data that is available to us is used, with our Blackboard login, we use a couple of different means to obtain the data. One is through the data mining work that's done in the student advancement area, which is in Glenn's team, where Blackboard data is used, overall Blackboard data is used, along with Student One data to provide us with some likelihoods of students to prioritise and who are likely to be at risk, but more so those students who have not logged into Blackboard at all each of the 4 weeks. More recently, for semester 2, we've worked with Glenn Jackson and the Analytics for Learning on the 20 or so units in the pilot for the A4L, and identifying those students who have not logged into Blackboard during each of the first 4 weeks in those particular units. And with those units, we have been following up, and they've been prioritised each of the 4 weeks. That campaign has now concluded because we're past the first 4 weeks, and there'll be outcomes and issues raised during conversations with students, collated and shared with our stakeholders. The second behavioural campaign is our assessments and assignments campaign. We've actually worked with the ADLEs in each of the faculties and our academic development advisors who sit in the student advancement team to identify which units to include. So in addition to the 20 units in the 20 or so units, 22 units, I think it is, in the Analytics for Learning, there are obviously a lot more first year units that we include in this campaign. The unit conveners are asked to provide, to identify the students first off that have either, failed or not performed well enough, I guess, or just did not submit key assessment pieces in any of the weeks between weeks 3 and 9, and also not only identify the students but also provide us with some additional specific supports. In some cases it could be additional study groups or additional tutors or additional workshops, and that is information we can use when talking to students and providing them with some solution or some encouragement about supports available to help them get through the pieces of assessments that is due. At the conclusion of each of those campaigns, each of the weeks, the unit convener receives a report on the campaign as well as feedback gathered throughout that campaign from students, and a summary of any issues raised. I think at this point I'm going to hand over to my colleague Kim Nguyen, and she'll talk about the operationalisation of the campaigns and how they work. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Vivian. So my name is Nguyen, and you guys have heard a lot about Swinburne Connect this morning. What I'm really here to talk about is how we're operationalizing it. So I think it was the gentleman, Tim, who said, now what do? We have the analytics, we're looking at it, we're predicting, but how do we put this into something that we can actually help the students with, which is what we're doing. So through the data mining, like Vivian said, we're looking at enrollment data. That's how the students come in. We're looking at their demographics. And then on top of that, we're overlaying their behavioral. So that's the Blackboard login, looking at what they're doing from day one and even right when they're signing up, and how they kind of track the first 4 weeks. The assessments and assignments is coming through manually, in that the lecturers, the faculty members are the ones that are tracking that data. They're looking at grades, they're looking at success rates, and then they're flagging that to Swinburne Connect with a bit of a briefing. So along the bottom there, it just shows you the 4 simplified stages that we go through. So the teams are monitoring, mining, and then flagging behaviors that might present risk factors, risk of disengagement with their course or their units. Swinburne Connect then intervenes. The idea is that we stop right then and there. We're not doing it post whole analytical project. It's we see something and we're going to call them and talk to them about it. And I'll take you through some of the conversations and what we do. We engage with them, so it's a friendly conversation. It is a professional, so it's people who've also graduated from a course, so they have the experience, but they're young enough to make that connection. It's not, a 45-year-old calling in saying, this is what I think you should do. And then obviously disrupting. So the students are on a path, they've done something that they're off track. And we need to disrupt that and bring them back onto a path that is going to be successful for them. So whether or not that's dropping a unit and staying enrolled in 3 units, whether it's why don't you talk to the lecturer and get that in late, it's something that we're not allowing them to continue down the path that they've taken. Obviously, we're connecting and referring. That's what Vivian was talking about before. It's having the expertise and the connections with all of the central services. So that's counseling, that's all of those centers, as well as what the academics are providing themselves within their faculties. Understanding that on a very up-to-date basis to be able to say to the student, what the best thing for you is to go see John in this office, and I'll give you the connections and I'll follow up with you. Obviously following up and monitoring. So once we make that referral, it's not done. We need to talk to the student again, and we need to make sure that any other issues that come up throughout the rest of that semester are flagged and we're speaking to them again. It's usually the same person, so it ends up being a little bit of a case manager, so they understand what's happened and they can continue to help them out, and students appreciate that. It's name to name, and it's that person who's there to help them. One of the biggest things we do at Swinburne Connect is we celebrate the micro wins with the student. So yes, you haven't gone from failing to high distinction, but you've just passed, and that's amazing. And so we let them know that that's something to celebrate, that's something that's disrupted where they've come from. So operationalizing it, obviously we're getting briefed, so whether that's the Blackboard campaign, and we're told what the parameters of that mining project were, or the actual faculty member lets us know what's happening in the unit, what was expected of the student, and then what the student can do to get back on track. So all of that's done prior to the phone calls. The data is provided to us, and then we start the engagement. So it starts always with an EDM, and that's just a mass email out to the student saying exactly what's happened. I've spoken to your lecturer, and they've asked me to do this, or based on whatever's happening, this is what we recognize, and we're going to give you a call. It's being very transparent, and it's setting the expectation for the student that someone's going to contact me because there's something that's not right there. And then the calls commence. As we spoke about, we have follow-up emails after every single phone call made, and we also send SMSs in specific campaigns in case the student didn't pick up their mobile phone, because a lot of don't, or they haven't read their email, which we know they're not because they're not even logging into the Blackboard. So it's using different channels to make sure we get the message across. The reporting happens immediately after the campaign's done, as Vivian said. There's definite opportunities. We have a whole bunch of data also in Swinburne Connect. Now we need to work with Glenn and the Glens to understand how that data comes back, so they can then start to use that to predict even better and a little bit more of a robust data set. So that's definitely something that we need to be working on in the next few years. This just, I'm not going to go through this too much, but it shows you the number of students getting pulled up in their commencing semester. Semester 1 is in the light blue and semester 2 is in the dark blue. That's obviously still going on. And it just gives you an idea of the volume of students who are getting pulled up as commencing. Remember, it's not continuing students. And obviously at the end of week 4, we would have created, or we're collating the data and the feedback to go back to the teams to understand what we found out is happening. The same thing with assessments and assignments. We're obviously right in the middle of semester 2, so that data is still low. But again, it gives you an idea of the numbers. This is based on faculties flagging those students and opting them in so they can get contact. One of the interesting things, and I think Glenn Bates said a little bit about this, is that they're getting flagged for not logging into Blackboard, but oftentimes that's not the issue. It's not that they don't understand how to log into Blackboard. Something else is happening. There's priorities in their life that they're focusing on, and by us using Blackboard as a trigger of disengagement, we're finding out what those problems are so that we can then refer them on to where they need to go to, whether it's academic, it's personal, it's financial. At least somebody's talking to them and putting them in the right direction. There's not a lot we can do. We can't make them have a job. We can't make them not have children, but we can definitely let them know that Swinburne understand and that they have people to talk to make the decision that's right for them. And then I just showed you some of the top 4 referrals we've done so far in 2016. Oftentimes it's student HQ, that's timetabling, that's those types of administrative things, going back directly to their lecturer or their tutor to talk to them about whatever it is that they need to, LAS and counseling, essential services. And I think that's it. I'll let Nguyen take over, talk a little bit about BI.
Thank you. Oops, wrong way. Okay. Wayne Jenkins, I'm the Associate Director of Quality at Swinburne. I guess I'm a bit of a data nerd as well, and I've picked that up inadvertently as well. One of the problems, I guess, from a quality perspective is if you don't have good data, then you really can't do anything as well. So I'd like to sort of do a bit of a stock take as far as where we were, where we're at as well. So where we were, and I guess a show of hands, for example, who has access to data around units, courses and majors here? Okay. In an ideal world, everyone would. The problem is that we've got data all over the place, or we had data all over the place as well. So it's primarily difficult to access. Where do you go if you want to find out the success rate of a major? How do you find that out? And at this point, I'm not surprised you don't know. I guess the other thing is that there's always been an emphasis on reporting to the government. That's great, but what about metrics that are useful for us internally? The two don't actually always coincide as well. So we've had to go back and talking to academics and find out, well, realistically, what data is useful for me? So to give an example, in the past we used to report success rate. So success rate is the number of students who pass a unit as well. Now, what academics are telling us is, well, that's not really that useful because there's a portion of our students that don't really try. They get a 0 or they withdraw or whatever as well. We can't do a lot about that. There's a different intervention for that as well. So we want to know the percentage of students that actually pass that have had a go as well. So we've produced a metric called adjusted success rate. So that's a more useful metric from an academic's perspective to understand what's going on in the unit. That's just one of an array of units that are quite relevant to academics as well. I mentioned the fragmented approach, so it's all over the place. And again, I'm hearing again, we're going to be starting to collect data on learning analytics, for example. Well, where does all that go and how does that fit in with all the other data we've got as well? And it must be really frustrating to try and source that data. So that's one of the things that we're working on. The other thing is the data is very, very laggy. So if you go back a couple of years ago, to get data on success rates and those sort of things, you had to wait 12 months because it was reported to the government. So we had to use official data. What's the point of that? 12 months down the track and we're going to start looking at things like success rate? Give me a break. But that's the mindset. That's how it worked as well. Glenn mentioned the student experience survey. That's been completed. It was run during August. So it's run with all commencing and completing students, undergraduate. We used to have to wait 12 months to get the analysis from that data. Our team should be able to get that data and have a preliminary report out by the end of November as well. But it's more timely. We've got a cohort that's completed in August. You should be able to access the data and see what's going on as well. Even better though is we can basically use Glenn's analysis and we can create our own metrics that are probably more relevant rather than some of the external metrics that that we use. And I've talked about not being that relevant. So that's where we were. Whoops. And I'm going backwards, but we won't worry about that. Okay, so I did want to go forwards to 2016. I guess the key thing, what we've tried to do as a project is basically to pull together what we're calling dashboards. So it's on a business intelligence tool called Tableau. And essentially what you have now is you have a summary of data by unit, course or major of key metrics. So these are the metrics that we think are relevant. That will obviously be expanded to take into account some of the learning analytics data we're collecting or some of the data that Glenn's collecting as well. So we have that produced within a week of the completion of each semester as well, and that goes out to management. And there's also a general staff report that's available to all staff as well. Now, I know most people probably haven't seen these reports. The key, and this is where our work starts as far as, I guess, raising the profile. Where do you actually access this sort of data as well? But we're working on that as well. But the good news is we actually, I've got 1 minute, shit, okay. Okay, the good thing is that that data is actually available now as well. The other thing is we've also put in some, I think, better metrics. So for example, we run a check-in survey now. So it's a student satisfaction survey that's run at week 4. So what that does is provides feedback to unit conveners about what students think of the unit, but even more importantly, gives them time to actually react to it. So it's traditionally we survey at the end of the teaching period. Now you've got something we do at week 4. Not surprisingly, the satisfaction at week 4 is really strongly correlated with the satisfaction at the end of semester as well. So then that begs the question, do we need an end of semester survey? Something to explore. We also have a confidence question there. So we actually ask the students, how confident are you in passing the unit? Glenn, I think, has done some data and says that it's actually reasonably predictive of whether the student's going to get through that unit as well. That information is fed back to Glenn's area and they chase up students. So more timely data is really important. I keep doing that. Okay, just an example of what we're going to try and do in 2017 is that we want to actually start incorporating more data. So things like language channels, ATAR scores, and the learning analytics stuff. What I've put up there is just some preliminary analysis that we've done on Tableau on the BI tool. What it's showing is the average grades that students get for different bands of ATAR. And the beauty of the BI tool is you can adjust this in real time and test it. What it's actually saying is that below 60, there's no real correlation between ATAR and a student's average. Interesting. Completely different to what people expect, but it's all over the place. There's something going on there as well. There is a significant correlation, but when you go into that 60 to 80 band as well, when we go into the 70 plus band though, the correlation is a lot stronger as well. So the point is that there are lots of perceptions about the data. Until we can actually start providing and analysing the data, we can break down some of those misconceptions as well. But that's an interesting observation, isn't it? And I guess quickly, the future, lead indicators. We are so lagging our data. You should be able to get data in real time. So what's going on in my classroom? More information about learners, so what's their learner profile, what might be useful. Have to be careful there as far as we're risking profiling as well, but I think there's some useful information we can get there as well. Real-time feedback. I went to a seminar a couple of weeks ago where they were using wearables in a teaching environment to test students' levels of anxiety. That was fed back to the teacher as well. Got to be careful that wearables aren't that reliable. Interesting concept though. And I guess where we're heading ultimately is in the future looking at student engagement, but also I think looking at the value out of university. And I'm looking at what the government's agenda is as well. So people go to university, where's the value add? And we're going to have to start measuring those sorts of things. So thank you.
Cool, this is working. Hello, I'm Anthony, and I'm going to provide you with a student sort of response and perspective on this. First thing I want to say is I'm glad to know, from my own personal experience, I'm bucking these data trends, particularly Glenn Bates' dropout rates. Though it would actually be an interesting perspective to see what the 2015-2016 dropout data says, particularly given the recent media reports that Swinburne's leading the way in dropout rates in the state. So that would actually be interesting to see where that's coming from. In terms of learning analytics and data, the default tend to be, from student perspective, is a bit wary when it comes to privacy around data. And we've seen this a lot with the University of Melbourne with the implementation of one of their latest data, the analytic programs that focus more around plagiarism, which I know Swinburne's looking to implement when it comes to how we measure students when they do their work, and particularly when we start building profiles of students which tell you when students start doing their assignments from that. But I'll try and keep quick because I actually want to get more into the discussion side of things, in that being able to get data and being able to use that data is actually really useful, particularly when we can actually make it known to students that the data that they provide is actually making a difference. One thing at the moment from the students' side of things is that we provide these data, we provide the unit feedbacks, but we don't ever see what the sort of response to that data is. So it is one of those things, when we're using analytics and we're using data and all that, is that we're actually making sure that we feed back to students that this is what your data is being used for and this is what your data has changed, so that we know that there is an outcome for providing all of that data. And I think I'm going to leave that one as my main point, is we make sure we have those feedback channels so that students know what data has been recorded and what that data is being used for and that sort of outcome. I think I might primarily leave it there because I actually want to get more into the discussion around it than sort of the feedback. So I might leave my feedback from there.
All right, excellent. Thank you, folks. I'll take that one from now. Yep. Okay, so I'll go over here. So we will open it up to questions and just comments as well, discussion, whatever it might be. Does anyone want to start us off? I have plenty, but yes. Oh, yeah, microphone.
My name is Chai Kok. I'm from Swinburne Sarawak itself. I could empathize with the fact that the retention rate of the people in management seems to be a bit higher. And several years ago, we did a embed what we call experiential learning in the first year student itself. So for learning management, we take them to the rainforest. We talk about how they could actually use the metaphors and connect the concept of management into the real experience itself. We did for the first semester when the new student itself, and then we do a follow-up a year later. So I was quite keen in the data that you have, because I actually do a qualitative survey and publish a paper on that sort of thing. So I'm very keen, and from what we got, even though the sample size was small, we did find actually an improvement in terms of the way they actually retain. The other comment that I want to make is that I like all the whole channels that you collect your data itself. One data that I collect very religiously, so to speak, right, that is not here, is the SFD and SFUs, the student feedback itself. I actually look at those data and actually look at the three key components. For example, I look at whether the lecturers communicate their ideas across. Yeah, I look at whether the lecturer has inspired me or motivate me or not, for example. So I define the key elements, and then I actually look at those data, and I actually track, because I've got a smaller class size, I track individual students. So I know, for example, where's the high and the low end, and that helps me a lot. So I'm not sure it's relevant, but it's something that I do, and it's actually, I'm very passionate about data analytics, so that's what I do. So those basically are a comment I made. Yeah.
I think this is a big data age, and data analysis is very important. But my question would be related to what do we do for the future? For example, are we going to develop intervention programs so that to change the situation, and then to develop a measurement, how much we have improved through the intervention program, and then make it as a more strategic level of things, rather than just, we got this problem, then so what? I think that is my either comment or question, see if you can have some response.
Yeah. Glenn, would you like to start with that? I'm sure Vivian and...
Yeah, and then we can go on. That's definitely the purpose of getting it. You know, I thoroughly agree with the idea. We can do some really good analysis on what happened in 214. We might publish it, but it's actually what we want to do is something for students coming into the program. So each of the things that we've put there, and I was trying to emphasise, led to changes in our intervention strategy. So with the management and IT people, and that was a really good comment, I like your intervention, because that was the sort of discussion that they had, but it also led us to the idea, well, students are coming to university less prepared for university study than perhaps they were a few years ago. And we have a number of interventions that are linked to the Swinburne Connect one. Like one I'm very proud of is our Strategies for Success program, a week of workshops about being a university student and motivation and study skills and so on, which we put on a week before orientation. And we've gone from about 700 to 1,400 students who are coming, mainly because we used the data to tell their parents that we followed them up, and they have a 5%, significantly higher, 5% on average improvement if they went to that program. So that was one example of trying to use the feedback from the data, and we've now followed them up for 3 semesters, and that's maintained. So academically, they're doing better. What was good for the intervention was that after we told a room full of parents that your son or daughter will get 5% higher on average if you come, enrolments went from 700 to 1,400 the next week. Parents still have some impact on their young people. So it's feeding back in meaningful ways to people, and also evaluating over time. And I think Kim was making the point that we're now getting all this other data. We can use it to refine what we do.
Do you see a discipline-specific strategy, or you think it's a university cross-wide strategy? If we dig into all those data, I think it's good that you got step 1 intervention. Maybe the next step is to really get into more in-depth and discipline-specific.
Really good point. It is discipline-specific. The Strategies for Success, we have 3 different programs, one for business, one for the engineers and science, and one for the health, arts and design people. But even in there, you need to have follow-ups that are specific to your discipline. And we're trying to do that in other ways with interventions while they're in the semester. So you get the basic things that are relevant to everybody, tuned to their disciplines or discipline areas, and then have follow-ups that are relevant to each person. But I think you're right, that's where you need to get to.
I was only going to add that at a university level, we have a retention strategy that's and a retention steering group that's chaired by Professor John Wilson, and there's representatives, well, Glenn and myself are on there as well as other representatives. And we have strategies across all different interventions that operate throughout the whole year, and we're measured to see that how we're tracking with those interventions and where we've achieved and what we've achieved, and they will feed into the following years, I suppose, planning for the strategies we want to follow up on. I don't know whether you wanted to add anything onto that.
Well, just I think as our data gets better, which was a point that Wayne made, because data is a real problem, that unit's becoming more and more potent, both in terms of not just monitoring attrition and when we might be losing people, but how do we engage students more effectively, which is where I think the field needs to go. So we're now getting better data on how and why we might be losing people, but the other thing is, well, how do we prevent that happening? And so that's brought together a whole lot of group of people who might have been operating independently, as sometimes happens in universities. Yeah.
Okay, we probably only have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Who had the... Mark, did you?
Hi, I'm Scott, convener, do most of the teaching online. Do you have any separation of data between the on-campus and the online? And in particular, you're using Blackboard Analytics. Have you used the email at the beginning, like especially you're talking about the difference between beginning and continuing students, and the amount of students who don't actually connect with their Swinburne email, and if I'm sitting at home working, I only have real access, it's not easy for me to grab any of the details to do, follow-up phone calls and all that sort of stuff. That was one particular area. The second part is, what are sort of the implications in regards to, increased expectations, because we do want to do more intervention and all that sort of stuff, given Swinburne's percentage of sessional employment and what that actually means when you're actually increasing workload from a sessional perspective and there's not the actual hours there.
Well, I can say a couple of things on that. The Swinburne email one is really quite a crucial one, and we've had a campaign through student comms and also through a group of us. We are promoting Read Your Email campaign, and the university has raised its email strategy or opening rate from 0.2, so 1 in 5 actually even gets opened, up to over half our emails get open. But how we've done that is to try, Vivian and I are on a planning and communications committee of really timing the email and using other social media, because as you say, not everyone, email's old hat, using a range of social media to make students aware of things and not to step on each other's toes. Still happens occasionally, but we don't want a Swinburne Connect email going out with one from another area saying the same thing. And we're learning to give shorter emails with not 25 links to connect to, because we know from the analytics they'll only ever click on the first one. So if you're number 3 or 4, no one will open it. So being more sensitive about multiple channels of communication to people, and using the Blackboard site and announcement sites as well with that. What we're trying to do, and I take your point about extra load on staff, and I think it's across the board on academics, because we're here to teach, and if you're a sessional staff, you've got a particular agenda of what you need to do, and you need to be supported appropriately. That's a huge issue for the university, trying to address that. But the other part of this is to use Swinburne Connect, my area, and I've got the learning academic skills, the careers people, and the academic development advisors, and to use those as a link person in each faculty. So we've got a few people in each faculty who we're getting the staff to know, this issue comes up, your role is this, to identify it and pass it on. And you can opt them into different supports. So we're actually trying to make sure that we're there to help that process, rather than the feeling, I'm a sessional tutor and I've got this distressed student, I've got to take full responsibility and there's no one to help me. We want to make sure that people know I can direct them in these sorts of areas. Yep.
The thing is, online, you're not visible.
Yeah.
Online, you're not visible, so therefore it can be weeks, and then they'll say, well, I haven't logged into my email.
Yeah.
And so there's lots of disengagement. Depending on the unit, first year, in the marketing area, is a lot huger, disengagement. Thereon, it's less and less, but you don't actually know. And that one of the data sets that you talked about, which was student belonging, sense of belonging.
Yep.
Even on campus, the research is showing now that students, because of their compartmentalised lives, busier lives, the sense of belonging doesn't actually happen like it used to when we talk about going to uni.
Yep.
That's even more compounded when you look at the online students who really, it's clock on, clock off type of, they're not there for the learning journey type of thing as much.
Yep.
Yeah.
I know Swinburne Online have a whole program of intervention and engaging with the students and following up in advance of when someone's not connecting. The advantage they've got is your activity online we know what you're doing in that sense. If we haven't heard from you, they've got a lot of follow-ups, and they've also been linking to other services. But the belonging one is a really interesting one, I think, because we do live in virtual worlds now. So it's not when I went to uni where you went on campus and you stayed around all day. We'll have a lot of students who rarely come on campus at all. They'll watch it on Echo 360 and so on. The sense of belonging, though, is transferable, and it's more in terms of feeling like you're a Swinburne student. And the more of engagement we have with students, they might live out of Wagga, but they're online study, but I'm a Swinburne student, and I think that's that element of shared values of education, and we're trying to do things in terms of getting mentors and connections across the board. But you're right, we have to accept that's different.
I will have to stop that just there, because I wanted to, sorry for the people who are just put their hands up. We are just about to tune into morning tea time. That wasn't a very good pun, but anyway. We did have a final student perspective from Anthony, which we just finished up.
Oh, this is actually. I think that's actually a really important thing is to look at online and different study modes, whether it be full-time, part-time. There's actually a massive difference in how students engage with it, but particularly online. While Swinburne Online has their own strategies, I think the other important thing to look at is OUA. Talking and dealing with online students. OUA, from their perspective and my perspective, tends to be the forgotten child at Swinburne. They, for the most part, don't feel like they're part of the Swinburne community. They tend to be forgotten about. And until recently, they didn't get any comms from like university, like Student Newsnet. So I think it's one of the most important things is to look at the retention with online and how we engage them and how they deal with the study. I think one of the parts of the retention is that we need to have people who have experience with studying online be the ones to help with that retention. Because it is one of those things I see is that online students quickly disengage with anything from student union perspective. It's one of those things we struggle to engage with online students to make them this is, even though it's been something traditionally on campus, we want to make it an online thing, and there's not that much engagement outside of their studies, and even by the sounds of it, there's not much engagement within their studies from those that I speak to. So I think it's definitely one of those areas we need to work a lot more on is online students and making sure they're, keeping their retention and making sure that they can actually succeed at university.
Thank you everyone for coming along, and thank you especially to Glenn, to Vivian, to Kim, to Wayne and to Anthony for their input today and for all your questions.